It's Thursday, October 30th, 2025. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Granthermes. Today on the show, cracks are beginning to show in the shutdown stalemate, but the dam isn't going to break before a lot of people get hurt. And we also just got our first look at the official cost of the shutdown to all of us, and it is not good. All of it happening while the president is out of the country on a tour of Asia, being met with gifts and galas and military bands, which actually might turn out to be a good thing. I'll explain. But first, make sure you're following or subscribe to the show on whatever podcast app you listen to it on. Like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications if you're a watcher on YouTube. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack, where I've got a brand new article all about the end of the months-long Republican-led investigation into whether Joe Biden was really president at the end of his term and if his staff was forging his name with an auto pen. I read the entire 100-page report after that investigation, and it tells a very compelling story, but it lacks one big thing: proof. To get that article in your inbox, you can become a paid subscriber to Make It Make Sense on Substack for just $5 a month. You can also sign up for free to get access to other articles and weekly newsletters. And as always, share the show on social media. It's Mims Newspod. It's MIMS Newspod, all one word on every platform. I am at Granthermes on Twitter and Bluesky, and at Granthermes TV on everything else. All right, let's get on with the show. You know, I've always got a cup of coffee next to me while I record these episodes. The studio is in the basement, and it's kind of cold, especially as we head into the fall and winter here, but a good cup of coffee is one of those small pleasures which I think we could all use right now. It's why today's episode is sponsored by Afuera Coffee. Afuera Coffee takes your coffee experience to the next level with their specialty, hand-selected beans sourced directly from sustainable, certified Rainforest Alliance farms in Central and South America. Rich, volcanic soils infuse each batch with unique, vibrant flavors. Afuera Coffee's commitment to excellence starts at the farm, where they work closely with local farmers practicing ethical and sustainable methods. Whether you prefer a bold espresso or a silky smooth light roast, their versatile range caters to all tastes. Now, I tend to go with a lighter roast in the morning and then switch to an espresso in the afternoon, but however you manage your own crippling caffeine addiction is, up to you. All Afuera materials, from coffee bags to mailers and postage, are either compostable or recyclable, and 5% of all sales go to conservation charities, which is obviously pretty cool. And right now, you can get 15% off your entire order with the code MIMS25. That's MIMS25 for their best discount offer right now, and you can only get it from Make It Make Sense. The podcast does get a cut of some of that, but honestly, it'll just go right back into ordering more coffee, so you'll be helping me stay awake to make even more things make sense. Again, that is MIMS25 at checkout at afueracoffee.com. That's AFUERA.com. Taste the excellence with every sip with Afuera Coffee. All right, let's get on with the show. Today is day 29 of the government shutdown. The record is 35 days, so we are less than a week away from what will be a financial cliff for tens of millions of our friends, families, neighbors, and fellow Americans that many will not be able to recover from or possibly survive. Now, these are numbers that I've talked about before, but I want to lay out the stakes here in some real detail. First, on November 1st, 42 million people are going to lose the ability to buy food because SNAP or food stamp benefits run out. That's according to the USDA. And they say that 1 in 3 people who rely on those benefits to not starve are kids, which comes out to about 1 in 5 kids in the U.S. that needs that money. And for what it's worth, that money costs the average American about $8 a month. Now, this week, 25 states and Washington, D.C. sued the Trump administration and the USDA, which runs the SNAP program, over a memo that the USDA sent out saying it legally couldn't tap into what's called a contingency fund to keep SNAP running, even though that's exactly what the fund is designed to do. In fact, the USDA and Office of Management and Budget during Trump's last term when the government was shut down approved tapping into that fund to help keep SNAP running. And as recently as September 30th of this year, so one day before the shutdown, exactly a month ago, the USDA had on its website a plan to use those same funds again this time around, saying it had been told by the agency's own lawyers that there was a guarantee that benefit funds are available for program operations in the event of a government shutdown. But that's since been deleted from the USDA's website, but that's why the Wayback Machine on the internet exists, because nothing really ever dies online, you know? But apparently, as part of the president's plan to make this shutdown as painful as possible, they're not going to follow that original plan that was their own plan just 4 weeks ago and are now actively fighting against it. And on that note of making this painful, Trump has said a number of times that he wants to target what he sees as Democratic programs. Here's what he said after the shutdown reached the 1 week mark.
Despite all of the damage that it's caused, the shutdown has been, pretty damaging. I mean, it's not yet because it's early, but it gets a little bit worse as it goes along. And we'll be making cuts that will be permanent. And we're only going to cut Democrat programs. I hate to tell you. I guess that makes sense. But we're only cutting Democrat programs. We'll be cutting some very popular Democrat programs that aren't popular with Republicans, frankly, because that's the way it works. They wanted to do this, so we'll give them a little taste of their own medicine. But Chuck Schumer proclaimed this morning that every day gets better for them. No, every day it's actually getting worse for them, and they're having a rebellion in the Democrat Party.
So the thing is, when it comes to who uses these government programs, 6 out of the top 10 SNAP-receiving states voted for Trump. That's Alabama, Oklahoma, West Virginia, Louisiana, Nevada, and Pennsylvania. So he's actually harming his own voters here. Now, a judge in Massachusetts, where the lawsuit was filed, is hearing that case as I'm recording this, and the reporting we're getting out of that seems to make it out like that judge is going to come down against the Trump administration. She said to the government today, if you don't have the money, you tighten your belt. You are not going to make everyone drop dead because it's a political game someplace. Which is a pretty scathing statement from a federal judge. And by the time you listen to this, her ruling could have come down, which will likely be appealed by the Trump administration if it's against them. And by the time it works its way through the courts, even with late-night emergency hearings, people are still likely going to go hungry. Also on Sunday, the Medicaid and Affordable Care Act subsidies, which the Democrats are fighting to extend, also expire. If those expire, the Congressional Budget Office has said that 6 million people will lose access to their health care. And as I've talked about before, a bunch on this show, that when people lose their health insurance, many just decide they're not going to get it again because it's too expensive to go and get it or too time-consuming and costly to sign up again. And that's going to hit rural parts of the country really, really hard because, again, like I've talked about on the show, thousands of rural hospitals or hospitals in low-income areas rely on those patients with those subsidies to stay fully open. And sometimes they're the only hospital for tens or potentially hundreds of miles around. And right now, somewhere around 700 rural hospitals nationwide are already at risk of closing. And just like SNAP benefits, despite the president wanting to punish Democrats, it's his own voters he's hurting. According to KFF, 77% of the people who use those healthcare subsidies, or around 19 million people, live in states that help send Trump to the White House for a second term. And I also want to say that the line you're hearing from the GOP right now, or the right wing in general, is that undocumented immigrants are the ones who are using the most of these benefits, and it's just not true. They aren't eligible for Medicaid or ACA subsidies, and according to the USDA's own numbers, 98% of people who use SNAP benefits are citizens. Preschool programs or Head Start programs around the country are also going to start closing next week, which many low-income families rely on for what is something like childcare. The highest using states of Head Start are Ohio, Missouri, Georgia, and Florida, the president's now home state, and 4 states that voted heavily for Trump. And then we get to federal jobs. Right now, between 1.4 million and 2.3 million federal workers have either been furloughed without pay or are being forced to work without pay, including air traffic controllers, the people who inspect our food to make sure it's safe to eat, federal courts who are trying to make sure people get their constitutionally guaranteed days in court and don't rot in local jails. It also includes some law enforcement, military, and defense personnel. And yes, I know that Trump said he's got a friend who's going to donate $130 million to pay service members, but that actually breaks down to like $100 a soldier. So it's also patently illegal and almost impossible physically to cut those checks to get them to people. But anyway, this shutdown is also the most expensive for the rest of us. The Congressional Budget Office just released a report that said after 4 weeks of being shut down, the U.S. has delayed $33 billion from being spent on payroll and benefits and stands to shrink the economy by as much as $14 billion, which is the high end. But because this thing isn't going to end anytime soon, that's pretty much guaranteed at this point. And to put that in perspective, the 2018-2019 shutdown delayed $18 billion and shrunk the economy by $3 billion. So that means our current shutdown, despite being shorter than the last one, is 300% more expensive. And letting these programs expire is also going to raise our prices on food. A key issue that Trump ran on to be president was food prices. The National Grocers Association says about 12% of all grocery sales in the country are made using SNAP. That means without that money, grocery stores are going to have to find a way to come up with billions of dollars in lost revenue that supports around 388,000 jobs, generates more than $20 billion in wages, and $4.5 billion in tax revenue. Not to mention, when it comes to spending a lot of money on what we call entitlement programs, so that's food stamps, but also Social Security, and yes, those healthcare subsidies, for every dollar spent, the U.S. gets back $1.50, which is a pretty good return on a thing that people generally think of as waste. Our insurance premiums are also going to rise if those people lose access to Affordable Care Act healthcare. It's a thing that I've also talked about before on this show. In some states, it could double or even triple your healthcare costs, even if you have private insurance, because insurance companies also rely on some of those government subsidies to help keep the rest of our prices low. So all of everything I just talked about is going to kick into high gear here in just a little over 48 hours, and senators know this. Right now, the vote over whether to reopen the government is in the Senate, and so far there have been 13 votes on it, and all of them have failed. Republicans in the Senate need to convince 7 Democrats to join them because budget votes need 60 votes to pass. The highest number of Democrats they've been able to convince is 5. But as of right now, leadership talks have all but stopped, partially because both sides are in this standoff, but also partially because Trump has been out for blood, and no Republican wants to be seen as going against him. But since he's been on this tour of Asia this week, we've gotten little blips of talks happening behind the scenes, sort of a while the cat's away, the mice will find a way to make sure kids don't starve kind of thing. You know, that old saying. On Wednesday, CNN started reporting that rank-and-file members of the Senate, so people who are not in leadership, who don't deal directly with Trump pretty much every day, have started what they're calling shadow negotiations to try to get a place where they can understand what the other party really wants and is willing to give. Senate Majority Leader John Thune told CNN that he would start having talks with moderate, centrist Democrats, quote, pretty soon. But later, his office turned around and said, never mind. He's not going to talk about health care, the Democrats' main ask, until after they vote to reopen the government. It was some pretty clear saving face for Thune because Trump would have gotten wind of him saying he was going to talk to Democrats, but also it's a line in the sand. Now, Democrats who also talked to CNN, though anonymously, said they're looking at making the new funding bill they're all talking about last for at least a year instead of expiring in just a few weeks when we would do all of this all over again just in time for Christmas. Alaska Senator and Republican Lisa Murkowski, a perennial thorn in the side of her more extreme party members, said she was encouraged by these talks happening, which I know doesn't seem like much, but it's a pretty big change in tune from what we've been hearing the last month. Now, a part of this, too, is that Republican senators know that their home states are being hurt, and their cries that it's the fault of Democrats isn't really landing with Americans anymore. A new Washington Post Ipsos poll out today found that more Americans still blame Trump and the Republicans for the government shutdown than Democrats by 12 percentage points, 45 to 33. However, that is fewer people who blamed Republicans and more people who blame Democrats since the start of the shutdown, though it's not really moving more than 3 points, meaning things are staying pretty steady. Likewise, Trump's own numbers when it comes to the shutdown are not doing well either. 63% of Americans say they disapprove of how he's handling the federal government. Now, he's never had majority support on this issue, but this is the highest disapproval he's seen yet, and that's not likely to turn around because more and more Americans are worried about this shutdown. At the beginning of the month, it was 66%. Now it's 75%. And we are squarely into Republicans being worried about this thing too. So what happens next? Well, more of these shadow talks happen, and we see where they get. When those healthcare subsidies expire, Democrats do lose their biggest bargaining chip, or at least the way they're talking about that chip right now, so Republicans might press a little harder to get more Democrats to come to the table. The prediction odds right now are that this thing lasts until November 18th, just over a week away from Thanksgiving and the start of peak shopping season. And unfortunately, things are going to get really bad for a lot of people, which means we all need to come together to help. Right now, food pantries across the country are feeling the strain. You can donate to your local pantry or food bank. They are always in need of things like dry goods or staples like flour or cereal, canned vegetables that you don't need a can opener for. Things like pouched chicken or tuna can also go a long way. So can things like kid-friendly foods, powdered milk, baby formula, period products, soap, deodorant, toothpaste. They're all vital for so many people right now. And if you have the resources and the time, volunteering or donating to those places can go a lot further than you think. And I wish this isn't how this has to work in this country, but right now it is, because it seems like the White House and Congress are set to make this the shutdown to end all shutdowns, while the rest of us, in the words of that judge, drop dead over a political game. And I'll have links to all of those resources on how to help your local food banks and pantries in the show notes of this episode. And that is it for today's episode. Please rate and review the show on whatever podcast app you listen to it on. Like, subscribe, leave a comment below if you're a watcher on YouTube. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack to get access to that brand new article I've got up for paid subscribers. You can also subscribe for free. And as always, share the show on social media. It's MIMS Newspod. That's MIMS Newspod, all one word on every platform. I am at Granthermes on Twitter and Bluesky, and at Granthermes TV on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Granthermes, and I'll talk to you tomorrow.